What's up, everybody? A couple of quick notes before we hop into episode 19 of the podcast. I want to mention a book that is a good read, The Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rick Rubin. Really good take if you are in the creative space, if you have any interest in the creative space. Definitely recommend it. And then I want to touch on one thing, which I do hit a little bit in this episode, although I think we'll do a deeper dive down the road. And that is the role of sports. I've watched a couple of documentaries recently. Highly recommend Breakpoint if you haven't caught it. It's really good. Follows tennis. There's also Full Swing, which follows golfers. The McGregor Forever series, also good. And The Last Dance. What I like about Last Dance is that follows the Bulls in the 90s, and that's really a team sport, and versus Full Swing, Breakpoint, and McGregor, which are individual sports. I think there's a lot of connection between being a stroke survivor and sports when it comes to sort of the mental aspects, the team sport, the individual sport, just the mindset that's required for sports and recovery, what elite athletes do to prepare, to overcome. I think it applies a lot to survivors. So I didn't do a huge deep dive in this episode, but those are some good documentaries to check out. And I think we'll do another episode down the road about sports and stroke recovery. I feel like there's probably something there. So yeah, again, enjoy episode 19, restoration versus reinventing, and when to go, which direction. Good morning, everybody. My name's Will Schmier. Welcome back to another episode of the Lovable Survivor podcast. In today's episode 19 of the podcast, we are going to be talking about restoring versus reinventing, balancing your post-stroke life, and how to handle when to restore versus reinvent, aka old self versus new self. Now, there's a lot to talk about with this topic. The biggest question, the one that comes up the most often, is when should you as a survivor consider restoring versus reinventing? Now, restoring is, obviously every episode we talk about how stroke affects people differently. This is no different. It is a case by case sort of self-discovery journey. And, there's going to be a lot of things we can cover in this episode and sort of like, drawing that line with yourself. I think it's different physically versus emotionally. I think that's often a time where individuals struggle when it comes to the recovery phases. And, like I said, there is no definitive answer. I think we all, as survivors, want that sort of old self to a degree. Certainly the parts that were easy and effortless. And it's not that, honestly, even for me, even the things that are hard now, they're worth doing, but it is difficult to know when is it time to draw a line in the sand. I'll give you a quick example. I mean, I still have right side hand weakness. My handwriting is better, not 100%, but I will admit I'm not constantly putting effort into my handwriting. Well, that's not true. I am putting effort into it on a semi. It's just not a daily basis because honestly, it's as much as I want it to be important. I don't feel like it is the number one thing I need to be working on each and every day. I think there are other areas that I would prefer to, and probably, honestly, I hate the word should, but honestly, yeah, should focus on other things. You just have to prioritize. You can't fix everything overnight. Sometimes, like I said, you got this balancing act. There's a list, you write that list down and you just got to decide is this the most important? And, I think it is not for me in this particular instance. But again, we're going to talk about like balancing and, restoring versus reinventing physical and emotional, and just how to navigate that for you. I think it always comes down to lists. I know it sounds silly. I know it sounds redundant, but really, it's an individual thing, and you just have to decide. And just to finish up that story, so my right hand is pretty good. Handwriting's not perfect. I think as a kid, maybe you did this too. When you were a kid, I always practiced a little bit lefty, even though I was right-handed. My sister was left-handed. I was kind of jealous. I love that lefties are pretty rare. But I was into sports, and I learned early on depending on, like, baseball is probably the exception. But you don't see a ton of players in the NFL, at least quarterbacks, and honestly in the NBA, where football and basketball were my top sports. You just don't see that many lefties. Think about golf. Like, honestly, is there anybody besides Phil Mickelson that's a lefty golfer? I mean, probably, but nobody like Phil Mickelson. It's once in a generation. It's pretty rare. So, I think that is a question that many survivors struggle with. And I think it really just comes down to, what is your preference? And, how important is the task that you're considering, switching? Getting that example, at least with hands, right? You're should I, or do I want to become left-handed if I'm right side affected, and then, taking a long time to rebuild? The other question you have to ask yourself, okay, is this important? Yes. Have I put enough time in? Have I been seeing progress in other areas? Could I put a little more effort into this? That's a very individualized question. And you have to just ask yourself, is this because I'm not putting enough time in? Is this because it's just slow? Is it because it just feels awkward? Kind of, it still feels awkward for me running. I'm trying desperately to kind of quicken my running, but it's been a long time since I played sports. Been a long time since I ran at all. Honestly, it was like 10 years. I think it was like around 30 was probably the last time I was running on a regular basis, and certainly not like I'm running now. So, I was in a wheelchair for a year, really not doing a lot of athletic. I mean, I was definitely working out last year in 2021, even a little bit at the end of 2020 when I got out of the wheelchair, but I certainly was not walking and running heavily on a daily basis. So, my legs still, even crossing 2,000 miles now in the last 6 months, there's a little untangling there. So sometimes it's just a matter of practice, and again, this is it restoring? Is it reinventing? Is it a combination? How do you balance? These are just common questions that we get as survivors. I've seen it time and time again in my therapy groups, with either other patients asking, other people in the stroke survivor group that I'm in. These common questions, and it sounds so cliche, but honestly, you just have to decide for yourself. Do I want that old self? Because, and ask yourself, why do you want to restore your old self? And take the time to reflect on that and see, does it really make sense? If I'm going to do it, what's the plan forward? And you have to think about that. Well, you can think about it however you want, but I think a good way to think about it is like, if you've ever played sports, and even if you haven't, even if you're just somebody who liked playing in the neighborhood with other kids, right? You don't have to be an athlete to have this. I think the athlete mentality helps if you played sports, but if you haven't, you probably gotten hurt playing with your friends at some point in your life, and you probably had to recover from that injury, whether it was a minor thing, or, maybe it was a little more severe. Maybe you broke a leg or a hand or a finger or whatever. It takes time to rebuild, right? So, using that parallel as an athlete returning to sport. And again, just same as if you didn't play sports, probably have been hurt at some point in your life before your stroke or brain injury. So it's really no different. It's just about getting safe, getting stable, and then, starting to build that level of comfort and, building that improvement and restoring the old abilities. And I think that's, that is not easy in some cases. It's challenging. It definitely is challenging. I mean, I face it every single day. And I still struggle with it 3.5 years into this stroke recovery because, like I said, like I just give you the example of the hand, but I'm sure there's others that I'm not thinking of at this particular second. And yeah, it's the desire to have that old self. But on the other hand, 3.5 years in, sometimes it is a little bit more opening myself up to reinventing or changing the way I'm thinking now versus the way I made a thought prior to my stroke, prior to this situation. And it's no less confusing. I don't think it matters. I just happen to be at that sort of middle. I guess I'm middle aged now. I'm 40. And I brought this up on a call with somebody today. And it's like, I'm in the middle of, honestly, I think the youngest I've heard is like a teen, which is pretty rare for a stroke. So let's say 20 to 65, right? I'm 40. I'm right in the middle. So yeah, as much as I want to think I'm sold 20, I'm definitely not, but I'm also not 60 yet. So fair enough. I'm in the middle and it is very hard. Do you go to your old self? Do you want it bad enough? Do I want it bad enough? Or do I want to maybe close that chapter and just examine, and I think you have to also factor that in. When you reinvent, it's not necessarily a change for better or worse. Maybe it's just a change worth exploring. It doesn't have to be anything, but I think you owe it to yourself to ask yourself the hard questions. Do I really want it? Like we just discussed. Can I recover? Make a plan, decide maybe with therapists and whether that's physical therapists, occupational therapists, mental health professionals, whoever it is, come up with a plan, come up with a strategy, come up with a timeline that seems reasonable, right? I mean, I think you owe it to yourself to not just put the timeline on yourself, because as a survivor, especially, like, I'll just be honest, like I know that I should give myself more time often when it comes to certain things, but I don't. But I also know that's why I ask for help when I'm talking to my physical therapist. Like, I want to be able to run at this pace, which seems reasonable to me, but I want to be able to do it in this amount of time, or, I want to explore another thing. And she'll be like, why don't you give yourself a little bit more time? You can make the steps smaller. I mean, I guess that's what I'm always guilty of. Sometimes I want to go from A to Z without, hitting all the other 26 letters. So A to Z, there's 24 in between. There's plenty of steps in between A to Z. So just be candidly, be honest with yourself, be candid with yourself, and just make sure you're allowing time for that improvement to take shape, and you're not really, as much as it can feel like as a survivor, sometimes we're running out of time, there's still plenty of time. And there's no, I think this is another big one too. I'm just going to say it. As a survivor, there's no, yes, we want to get back to the way we used to be, or, sometimes you just want to get to the new version of yourself. If you're going to go that route, totally fine. I do it all the time. But you owe it to yourself to be safe and also be realistic. So I think that's where balance between restoration and reinvention really, honestly, this is going to sound silly, but it's a skill, and it just, you have to give yourself time. Realize that, I've actually been thinking about this a lot. I'm still struggling with the fact that things just take me longer than they used to. I've been reading it in books. I know I'm not alone. I've been reading it in research. It's kind of difficult for me to deal with because I loved personally the speed with which I used to react, the way with which I was able to navigate certain things. I'll give you another example. I'm recording this early June. And so we've had a family thing come up very recently, and, it's fine. Like, for me, it's not, I've been through enough. It doesn't really, it involves me, it involves my family, but it does not involve me specifically. So some plans that we had for early this month have changed, and it's okay. We can certainly overcome. We can certainly prepare, but in the speed with which things are happening, for me, I kind of like to take my time when it comes to, even when something sort of not so great happens, I like to take my time to really assess, like, I'll just be clear about this example. Something has happened in the last 24 hours, which has prematurely ended a vacation that never started. So there's that. And then, yeah. So my family is away and I'm staying at home, but I'm staying at home because a couple of reasons, because I feel like I need to hold things down. My role has changed since my stroke. And I think a lot of us can identify with this is, I've said it ad nauseum on this show and to people. I'm 6'8", 325 pounds. I'm used to being, in college, I was the guy that moved everybody's apartment. Most of my life, I've been the big guy to show up to do things. Had a household for a long time since I married my wife. Even my parents were around. I got so big, like, everybody, a lot of things fall on me by default. And it's just kind of my natural role. It's something I've been happy to do, have been happy to do my entire life. Usually when there's a big undertaking or crisis, I'm the first one to step up. I have no problem running the show, taking control, leading the charge. But in this particular instance, yes, it was important to me, but I just I'm still, this is where I'm unsure of myself. And I think that happens a lot with survivors. It's not anxiety. It's just like, okay, I can't move as fast. I'm not quite I'm still a big guy. I can still do a lot of stuff. I'm certainly in a good, healthy spot, but I like to slow down a little. I like to really assess and get an understanding of what's going on and what's the best plan forward. So it's fine. Family is away now, taking care of business down south. I'm at home holding them the fort with half of the family. I'm kind of strategizing, and then it's a new role for me. I'm the point man, but from a distance. So I'm still on the phone, involved, part of the team, but it's just a different role. So I think it's interesting timing, certainly, because it's been in the last 24 hours I've had to decide, and that's very similar to, do I restore the old Will? Sure, I could have hopped in the car too and gone down south, but the new Will has to reinvent, and it's like, I don't want to be a burden. I just want to be, now I'm able to obviously take care of myself, and that's fine. As you could look at, my wife was taking it a little out of context. I do not necessarily want to be myself. I would have much rather that this not happened and we just gone on vacation like we had planned. But that's life. We certainly have dealt with challenges, unexpected happenings before with just my immediate family, with my wife and kids, and then uh, others. So this is not our first rodeo, but I think a lot of people are used to this, especially as stroke survivors. And it's just, I got to be honest. This is not a great situation for my family, but I will say it is. And this is so bad to say, but I'm just going to say it. It's nice to be a survivor, having gone through stuff and not have to be the person going through a thing for once. Nobody ever wants to go through any kind of family situation, family event, but it is nice to not be the focal point for a change because it's been that way for the last couple of years. So. But yeah, again, just a lot of thoughts when it comes to this. And again, it's not just the physical stuff. The physical stuff is always kind of really easy to talk about, but the mental stuff is a little trickier. Obviously, I think we talked about it before, but we don't always see the emotional toll things are taking on us. We don't see the emotional toll for our loved one, that this being a survivor takes on family and loved ones. My wife is the primary caregiver for me at this point. And I know she's had a tough time. It's hard. I know it's hard for her because we talk about it, and I'm incredibly grateful. I'm incredibly thankful. And that's, the reason I'm not with her this week is because I'm good enough at taking care of myself. I certainly I wanted her to go. I wanted her to leave the boys, but we just decided that the cousins should go play because in case anything happens, they should all be together. And honestly, I want to be there for my wife, but I think it's just better at this point in my stroke recovery journey. Because I'm a big guy, because, we had other plans, because there's things to take care of. And hopefully others can identify with this because it's always tricky. I want to be there for my wife, but I don't want to be in the way. I'm a big guy. I come with a lot of stuff. I still have machines. I still have a lot of pills. It's not just like, it's not the same as 20 years ago when I would just throw a bunch of stuff at a backpack and hop in the car and go away for a week. It's just different. I am very thankful that my life does not revolve around being in a wheelchair anymore. It's fantastic that I've gotten myself to a healthy spot out of a wheelchair. But it's just a lot. It's just a lot. And honestly, I think when I'm so good at dealing with this stuff, but I'm better at being at home because as much as I want to be there immediately for her, there's too many factors that there's a lot of unknowns. So we're already in summer of 2023. So obviously the kids are able to go with her. Otherwise she would have left them here and she would have just gone to be with her family. And on top of that, I forgot to mention at the top of the show, I'm a new uncle as of this past weekend. So, family stuff is quite a bit of family stuff. More family stuff than I honestly can handle at this point. It's interesting. I took the morning off. I had a call this afternoon that I, again, almost forgot about. After forgetting about it last week, which I am insanely sorry about to this individual because I had planned on being in a car traveling to vacation this week. And I thought we'd just be in the car and I'd take the call and it'd be super fun sitting in the car, talking on the phone. I'll drop while my wife drove. And the last 24 hours has kind of put a little damper on that. But anyways, I was going to kind of, when you think about the post-stroke journey and sort of the parallels to mm, do I restore the old self versus new self? I do think it is, you need, if you have experience being an athlete, I think it's incredibly helpful. I think that is true regardless of this actual topic. I think the process of getting stronger mentally and physically, I will say it's definitely helped me. I think having that athletic background and that athlete's mentality. And when it comes to restoration versus reinvention, and the same thing is true with, I guess adaptation kind of falls in there, right? Like, is it, restoring is obviously very straightforward, reinvention straightforward, but adaptation's kind of in that in between. So, let's not forget that too, because, that is kind of that middle, that very gray area of good enough. And that may work for some things. And I think that's where I've landed with handwriting. It is adaptive. It works for me. It's not ideal, but, weighing the options, it's more towards the restore side, but it's definitely not perfect. But I think that adaptation is right where I need to be. And, I was going to draw some parallels to basketball, but because the NBA playoffs have just started, which is a really interesting thing to watch. I guess we can kind of hop in there. I have a lot of thoughts on this topic. It's I mean, I don't want to boil it down to too little, but at the end of the day, like a lot of things when it comes to stroke recovery, you do have to sit down, you have to assess, and you have to decide for yourself, am I interested in trying to get this fully restored? Do I want to hit that middle ground and just kind of find something adaptive, or do I want to completely reinvent how I'm doing things and how I'm approaching things? Now, just before we wrap up here, I do want to touch on the mental side because I feel like I've definitely gone a little more towards the reinvention side on the emotional sort of mental side of the recovery journey. But I also think there were some things that I was doing before that were very clear for me that were taking a sort of mental toll. And I think we've talked about these as well, but like my career was great, but I don't think it left me in the best mental state. And I think I know I'm very clear on a lot of things now. Like I never put up a lot of BS, but I really don't stand for it now. And I think that is becoming more and more clear as each day goes on. It could certainly be because I'm 40 now and I really I don't have time for nonsense and bullshit. Like I'm working too hard on myself, my life, my emotional and physical health, my family. Then, I'm working with them on their different things, like whether they want to work on physical or emotional health, their health in general. Like I'm interested in different things, and that's okay. We all evolve and change. This could be completely unrelated to my stroke. However, I feel like it certainly has played a role as has aging and getting older. I think something sort of does click as you get into your late 30s and start to turn 40. We definitely, I don't think I'm alone here. You start to have different conversations with your partner, your spouse. I know I have conversations with my wife and kids that are just different than even 3 years ago before my stroke, even 3 years, 2020, different than then, because I just keep doing the work. And I feel like, and it's a lot of trials, a lot of trials and tribulations, a lot of testing and trying. I'm definitely open to trying new things, things that I never thought I'd try, things that I brushed off for the first half of my life. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, but there's still a few old things that I really want to get back to, like woodworking. I would love to get back into woodworking. I got back into podcasting. I was into it before, but and there's new things that I want to do and try. And like running is a great example. Like I hated running my whole life. I played sports. I was not unfamiliar with running, but I had a shitty relationship with running, to be honest. I think I also had a shitty relationship with breathing. And until I discovered that last year and really took to nasal breathing and doing a lot of that stuff. And again, I'm working on that course, which we'll talk about in a couple episodes once I get that fully fleshed out and released. But yeah, taking breathing seriously, understanding nasal breathing and the power of it, and like how much I was doing incorrectly has actually helped with all things. That has actually helped with mental health as well. It's really interesting how you take to a new thing, and it, breathing obviously is something we all do, but once you kind of understand if you're breathing incorrectly, which, to be clear, I was a habitual mouth breather for 39 years. So now that I've gotten into practicing nasal breathing, I practice it continuously every day. I breathe, that got me into running. I feel like running is no longer something I hate. It's something I look forward to. Probably too much so at this point because I'm doing a ton of it. But that's the way I operate. I get into a thing, I find it's working, and I want to keep doing it. It's just like everything else in life. You see it a lot with marketing and technology. People get into a thing, they find the thing that works for them, and they keep going until it doesn't. And breathing is no different. And I've just seen a lot of positive effects of breathing. So, that's that. That's why it's my jam. That's why I talk about it all the time. I think people don't listen, but they should, just like I should have a long time ago. It's just funny how much better overall your health and well-being can be once you just breathe better. That's why I love the title of the course that I'm building, Breathe Better, Feel Better. It's so obvious, but like, yeah, I mean, even last year when I got into nasal breathing, it was like, holy shit, how did I go 40 years and not realize, oh, this thing that we have to do to live, I was doing okay, but I didn't realize you could do it much better. And I feel much better since learning how to do it much better. It's really interesting how that works out. But yeah, I mean, we all know, I think, that as survivors and caregivers of survivors and family members, that it's never easy being a survivor. It is a delicate balance of restoring versus reinventing, both physically and mentally and emotionally. And you really just, as with everything else, it is sometimes a struggle. It is sometimes disheartening. There are times where you don't know if you want to give up and say, fuck this shit, I'm out, or if it's always worth continuing, but it's, I think we're all guilty of having those days, and it's not even guilty. It's like we deserve to it's okay to have those days. Just be mindful that you're not having too many of those days without talking to somebody, because, it's hard. It is hard. We talk about it every single episode, just how difficult these changes are. And I think, when it comes to restoring versus reinventing, just remember to try to stay resilient, focused, and it's okay also to adapt, as you go through the process, and just reassess. As always, what works best for you may not work best for somebody else, but it's certainly worth talking about and having conversations with other survivors, your therapy team, everybody involved, your caregivers, your family. And, because these decisions are not easy. Honestly, they're not, and I can't tell you, yeah, well, you've been trying for 2 years and it's not any better. Maybe you should be left-handed. Like you need to be comfortable with those choices, but you need to be honest with yourself as well. So again, I know this is not super clear. There is no definitive answer when it comes to stroke. We all know that is a really, as time goes on, you sort of understand it more. But if you're early in the journey, just know that that is an ongoing process. And so is this, until you feel like you have restored or reinvented every facet of your life. God bless. Best of luck to you. It seems like to me, I'll be doing this till the end of time. And that's okay. It just comes down to personal preference. So that's it for restoring versus reinventing. A couple things I do want to talk about on the fun side of things. Let's give my friend Kavan a shout out. Making Twitter friends. And if you are into social media and a stroke survivor, caregiver, family member of somebody who's had a stroke, hit me up on Twitter. My handle is at Lovable Survivor. But Making Twitter Friends is a free email course by my buddy Kavan. Check it out, makingtwitterfriends.com. I'll put a link in the show notes. Really cool 5-day email course. This is somewhat what my course is based on. Kavan. I did this because I know Kavan through through Twitter, but also through another thing. And so he just released a video series that I really enjoyed on making like a mini course for email, which is something I've been kind of not so into, but really he showed me, oh, I dig it. So I'll be kind of working on that the next couple of weeks and releasing that soon. But yeah, that's a cool thing to check out on Twitter and the internet. Let's see, Netflix. I love the NBA playoffs, but I love Denver versus Miami, but Denver is a really solid fundamental basketball team. The Miami Heat are a little bit different. I love the series, and I love the NBA and I've loved the playoffs, but this NBA Finals is the way they have it scheduled, the way it goes back, and I don't know. Yeah, I just missed a couple weeks ago when there was playoffs every other night. So we'll see, but hopefully, it's tied 1-1 in the NBA Finals. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out before the next episode. But on Netflix, I cannot believe it, but I'm recommending a CW program, All American. I just watched half of season 4 and all of season 5 that is now available on Netflix. I have no idea why I like this show so much compared to all the other options to watch on television, but I guess part of me just wants something different. And I really like All American. I think it's a good show. So check that out if you're into it. It is a little football related, but not really. And then the other recommendation I'm going to make, I cannot believe I'm making. I watched it over the weekend. Bama Rush, a little documentary on HBO. Really interesting. Having been in Greek life myself, although clearly not at Alabama because I did not want to go there. Fun fact, my grandfather was a professor at University of Alabama, and my grandparents used to live in Tuscaloosa, and we used to go visit them when I was a kid. It does not look any more exciting than it did 25, 30 years ago as a young kid. But yeah, I think people are making a big deal about that. I don't know. Greek life was something at Miami, definitely not as popular as some of the schools that are not major metropolitan areas. But yeah, I think it's pretty nothing earth shattering to me. It's kind of weird to see that almost nothing has changed in 20 years since I rushed Greek life. I mean, I think the only real difference is that now things are all over social media. And when I was in college, social media was just starting out. So yeah, a little different. Nothing surprising to me, but you may find it interesting. I mean, it's definitely interesting. It's worth an hour and a half watching, certainly in the background if you're into it. But yeah, I think that's it's worth a look. I love watching things that are just kind of unique. And although this show is not always about what's happening in the world around us, I like to be aware of what things around us, whether they're good, bad, or ugly. Because they're fun to talk about. It's nice to know what's going on in the world. Especially in a world where a lot of us work from home now. So yeah, recommend those things. And I think that's it. We'll leave it there. So that's the end of episode 19. Hope you enjoyed it and looking forward to talking to you next week. And bye.